I stood at my bedroom door with my eyes closed. My wife is lying on the bed and her back is against the headboard. That's how I left her. Her wrists have been tied to the bedpost and her ankles have also been restrained in the same fashion. The sheets and blankets she lies beneath are burgundy and they are made of silk. Her hair is black and thin and her eyes are pale blue. They bore into me as I retreated from our bedroom. Terror shifted in her eyes as I shut the door, and all that remained was silence. And then the screaming began. I opened my eyes and stared into the dark swirls of these old doors, and then I grabbed the brass handle. I turned it, and the door tumblers clicked. The door creaked as it swayed open. My wife still sat up, but now she had become something else entirely. Her skin was thin, pale, waxy, and it clung to her skull the same way a wet cloth clings to an apple. As she blinked, the folds in her eye sockets were many, and her cheeks hung like drapes over a window. She heaved, and with each breath, the skin over her skull flapped. She pulled at the restraints I made for her, and the skin of her bicep swayed in the wind as though it was a curtain. My wife had become nothing more than skin draped over a skeleton. The fat and muscles had disappeared from her body. As her mouth hung open, her jawbone and her vertebrae reflected the pale light of the candles in the room. I could see that she was not even a husk of a person, but something else. I don't know what she was. All I know is that she isn't my wife. The smell of sulfur, rotten eggs, trespassed into my nose and the air tasted foul. Our bedroom was lit by several mounted candles on each face of the wall. The walls were of a deep shade of red, nearly brown, and from waist height to the ceiling there were rectangular molds. At the center of each mold was one mounted candle stand. Each stand held 3 candles. Though there were many molds and many stands, the room itself was still dark and gloomy. Each candle was lit, and they radiated a faint yellow glow. They often released a subtle pop and crack that could be heard in times of silence. Times such as these. I approached the bedside of my beloved and held the Bible close to my heart. Her eyes had become pale, silvery orbs, and within them I could hardly see the woman I gave my soul to. She spoke to me, and as she did, her skin swayed with each word. She said,
"Nothing will save you. Both of you deserve the second circle, and you cannot change that."
The voice which reverberated from my wife's mouth was not my wife's. It was that of a demon, and I felt that this demon's mode of being was nothing less than vengeance. I had cast out his brethren to the depths of hell, and now they saw fit to leave behind not even a husk of my wife. I looked into this demon's eyes and said, "I curse you back to the inferno from which you came." I grabbed my Bible and held it before me. The demon smirked as its eyes fell away from me. It said, nearly as a whisper,
"Your wife's skin blistered and burned as we bathed her in the River Styx, and thousands of hands from thousands of souls picked and pulled and ripped her from limb to limb, piece to piece, and demons cast her pieces into depths so deep that their bottom is blackness, and the horizon reaches onward beyond what the eye could ever hope to see. Those same hands push the head of your beloved into the mouth of Cerberus, where he gnaws upon her skull as it bends and breaks between his teeth, and her eyes dangle from her sockets and sway to and fro with each bite. Blood drips from her spine and into the River of Styx, forever feeding it and feeding those that dwell there. Do not try to save your wife, for she has been ripped to too many pieces and cast to too many depths, and never again will she be whole. And since she's already dead and cannot die again, forever shall we dance to the symphony of her screams and drink from the well of her soul.
The demon did not sway, nor did it look at me. My hands were tingling, for I squeezed the bottle of holy water too tight, and something greater than rage was boiling in my heart. As the demon turned its head, and its skin swayed, and its hair whisked in the wind, I cast the holy water onto it, and it splashed into its left eye and across its cheek and brow. Smoke billowed from its cheek, brow, and eye. The creature screeched but did not cower and began to gnaw at its own wrist. I stepped back and studied the demon further. Its left eye continued to breathe smoke, and a clear liquid poured from it. An eye, once silver and glassy, now bore into me. The demon did not release me from its attention, and its eye, now drained of fluid, resembled a deflated balloon. My stomach turned as my hands quaked at the sight before me. This eye folded in upon itself, and the sight of a half-folded eyeball burned into my mind. The demon ripped the deflated eyeball from its socket and hurled it at me. It thudded against the floor and slid to my feet. I refused to look at it and watched as the demon chewed through skin and bone to free itself to no avail. A thick black liquid, something which reminded me of oil, poured from the demon's eye socket. The liquid absorbed the light which touched it, and because of that, it reflected nothing. I heard a crack and then a break as the demon chewed through its own wrist, and then I realized that I must leave at once. The demon flung back, and from its mouth poured more black liquid. It gagged as though it was vomiting, and the liquid consumed my bed entirely. It began to inch up the walls and reminded me of a starving shadow hungry for light. The blackness was absolute and unforgiving. I turned around and opened the door. As I stood in the doorway, I glanced back at the demon, and it convulsed and writhed atop my bed. I closed the door and turned around, and to my surprise, I was not in my hall. I looked around, and I noticed I was in the library below my bedroom. The walls were bookshelves, and they reached the ceiling. I walked to my desk, lit a candle, and looked up. The blackness from above was fingering its way down the ceiling, and some of it dripped like rain. I moved the candle around and saw the ceiling was consumed, and the liquid had begun to trickle down the door. I opened the door of my library, and from where I was, I saw the dining room. As I walked through the doorway, the dining room melted away, and before me was a bath, toilet, and sink. I cursed the demon and turned around to face the door behind me. Once I opened it, I gazed onward into the kitchen. I stopped where I was and stood straight up. Now I could hear it. I could hear her. The voice of my wife whispered from the kitchen and toward me. At the right of my kitchen is my living room, and I could see blackness spreading upon those walls. That is where her voice was coming from. Once I collected my thoughts and accepted that my wife was already dead, I passed through the doorway of the bathroom and found myself in my study. Dimly lit candles illuminated this room, and at the center of it was a vast desk with papers scattered around it. I turned my head toward the window and saw the trees swaying in the night. I bit my lip and ran for the window. The glass was sharp and cut my arms. As I sailed through the air and out of my study, I looked down and noticed the kitchen sink below. I crashed to the floor of my kitchen and looked into the bathroom. It had become enveloped in black, and little could be seen. The living room to the left had been consumed by blackness, and there was no other option but to return from where I came. I jumped through the kitchen window and arrived in the attic. The blackness had not yet touched this part of the house, and I could only tell because silver rays of the moon danced upon the wooden planks of my floor. I sat down and looked through this window and saw the vast expanse of trees and fog. The pines were tall and full, and ghosts clung to their branches and bristles. Below me was grass that was yellow and crisp. The bushes were much the same. They shed themselves of their summer leaves and were naked for winter. The moon hung high, and I knew that if I leapt from this height, I would surely die. I heard her then. A soft whisper carried by the ghost of a passing breeze. I turned around and noticed the blackness had now inched into the attic, and all that remained was this little area in which I sat. I stood up and drove my elbow through the attic window. The glass shattered and glittered against the moonlight as it fell. I leapt from the attic and crashed against the stairs of my basement. But finally, there was hope, because I lay halfway into the basement and halfway out. The yellow grass, now sharp as needles, pricked my cheeks. I craned my head up and looked forward. A forest made of pine and ghosts of fog stand before me. I pulled myself up from the depths below. In the basement, I heard her. I ran away from her and into the forest, through the damp mist and against the branches lined with green needles. They scraped against my shirt and pulled at my pants as I ran. I ran until the house was buried by trees and fog, and then I ran more. My lungs ached and my arms hurt. I found rest beside a tree, and at its trunk I sat. I heaved and struggled to catch my breath. The silver rays of the moon break through the branches above me. A steady wind pushes the branches, and this creates a subtle dance of moonlight upon the forest floor. Cold air bites at my exposed flesh, and the sweat which once kept me cool now chills me. My teeth chatter as I cower against this tree. Again, I heard her. I looked down at the stretch of trees and saw her weave between them. Her feet and hands had been chewed off, and she walked on her exposed bone. She groped through the darkness. Her skin swayed against the cool winds, and with that, her skeleton was revealed. I turned away from my beloved and ran deeper into the forest, opposite from where she was. I could hear her asking for me, and I ran until her voice became fainter. Into the night I ran until I heard her no more. I found rescue at an old church, and there I recovered. I bade my goodbyes and farewells and abandoned this place for the rest of my days, and never again did I return. Hey, it's Michael Bearre. Thank you for listening to Second Circle. If you liked this story, be sure to subscribe so that way you'll know when the next one comes out. And if you really like this story, leave a skull in the comments, and I will see you in the next video.